Welcome everybody to today's PCA webinar. We're going to let some folks join us in the room here, and we'll get started in a second. So thank you again for joining today's webinar on how to get sports parents on your side and be a positive part of your culture. I'm Jason Sachs. I'm the CEO here of PCA. I've been lucky enough to be with the organization for the last 19 years and super excited about the conversation and the guests that we have today. So just a quick housekeeping. If you do have questions, please enter them into the chat and we'll try to get to some of the questions throughout the conversation. But today's conversation is really geared towards how parents can, be on your team as part of the youth and high school sports experience and how you can make them a part of your positive culture. PCA is an organization that works with schools and youth sports organizations and local communities to try to ensure that all kids have a positive youth sports experience. And it's important that all stakeholders involved in youth sports, whether that be coaches, parents, the student athletes, or the organizational leaders, are all aligned on the same page. So today's conversation is going to be definitely geared towards those how parents can be an asset, and a conversation around what are some tangible tools to get them involved in a positive way. So we'll start with some introductions. We have a great panel today. I'll start introducing everybody one by one. First is Alex Auerbach, who joins us as the performance psychologist and CEO of Momentum Labs, who we're lucky enough to partner with here at PCA. Alex has advised teams and athletes in the NBA, NFL, and most recently with the newest WNBA team, the Toronto Tempo. And Momentum Labs is a PCA trusted resource and performance coaching group that helps athletes and coaches build the mindset to pursue their passions with grit, resilience, and well-being. So thank you, Alex, for joining us today. Our next panelist will be Erin Chastain, who is entering her fourth season as head women's soccer coach at the University of Minnesota. Prior to Minnesota, she served as the head coach for DePaul women's soccer for 14 years. Needless to say, she's interacted with a lot of sports parents in the recruiting process over the years, but is also a sports parent herself of two daughters and has been a longtime PCA National Advisory Board member. So thank you, Erin, for joining us today. And our final panelist is Steve Magness, who is a former coach, elite runner, author, and parent. Steve's books have sold over 750,000 copies, been national and international bestsellers, and have been translated into more than 25 languages. He has served as a performance coach to numerous professional sporting teams, executives, entrepreneurs, artists, and more. And he's worked with Olympians, athletes from every professional sports league, and the U.S. military. So Steve, thanks for being a part of the panel today. And as you can see, we have a great group of folks here, and we're going to jump right in, and we're going to set this up really as a three-part part of this webinar, where we're going to talk about what you can do in the preseason, what you can do during the season, and then what are some other things that pop up when you're dealing with parents. But we really want to make this as framing this as a way to get, how parents can be a positive part of your culture. But in order to do that, we need to do some framing. I think often there might be some comments for, we would love to do this, but the parents are out of control, or parents are a huge issue in youth sports. So we're gonna go around the horn here, and I just want each of you to maybe talk about what are the currently you see as the biggest challenges involving youth and high school sports parents. So Alex, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Jason, and excited to be here with you all and with this great group that we've got here. I think there are a lot of challenges, but I think the biggest challenge is what I perceive to be the largely unrealistic expectations of how many kids will make it to the highest level in sports. You're all probably familiar with the numbers, but it's an incredibly tiny fraction of high school athletes will go on to collegiate sports, and collegiate sports onto the professional level. And so we've built our entire sports ecosystem to really be about consistent progress to the next level, and really the financial benefits of getting there, and not so much about the enjoyment of the process or developing the game in the way that we'd like to see it develop. And so I think that's, for me, that's, I think, the biggest challenge that we navigate, is helping parents understand how to manage expectations appropriately while still engaging their kids in a healthy way in sport.
Great. Erin, what about you?
Well, I might sound like a broken record. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here too with this wonderful panel of great information, which hopefully helps the group. But the unrealistic expectations are what I would say also. I think it's really been crazy to see this business that youth sports has become. And I think because of that, and because the money parents are spending on their child participating, I think those expectations get bigger and bigger, and then that shapes their child's experience. So I think it's really, really just unrealistic expectations. We're playing for a scholarship, and instead of, playing for the love of the sport. And then if they happen to be good enough, then we can enjoy that path.
Great. Thanks for that, Aaron. And Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Just echoing, thanks so much for having me. This is a thrill and excited to do it. I completely agree. I think expectations are number one. To go in a slightly different direction, to, add something else, I think maybe underlying that is the anxiety that people feel, and understanding why they feel that anxiety and why those misplaced expectations are there. And I think part of it is it's gotten so much worse because we can literally compare ourselves to everybody. And if we go online, that parent is going to look at like, oh, look at all these other parents over here spending all this money and private this, private that to get their kid in this place. Do I care about my kid? Of course I do. So I've got to copy them. So I think that like underlying anxiety we have to acknowledge. And then the last thing, this is kind of a out of left field wild card, but I think there's some truth to it, is also a lot of people are just like numbed out in the world because the world is just kind of crazy, chaotic, and we just kind of numb it. And what happens is youth sports is one of the rare places where parents feel things again, right? They get excited. They're like, oh my gosh, my kid's playing a game. Like, you feel something again. And I think we can't discount that either, is maybe you're going from your 9-to-5 job where you just feel like a machine, or like AI is going to take over the world and you're not going to have a job. And you go to your sports thing and you're disconnected from your phone for the first time in forever. And you're focused on something, your kid playing it, and it makes you feel alive. So because of that, like, you do the dumb thing, which is like double down on thinking, oh, I have to go even further down this, which leads us to the misguided expectations and craziness.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for that, Steve. Yeah, I feel like sometimes, whether it's a coach or a parent, it's like, well, it's a sporting event, so all rules go out the window and I can just act however I want. So we're going to get into some of that throughout this conversation, but I do want to, at PCA, we talk a lot about the importance of setting expectations. So when we think about, the preseason and setting the tone with parents as they're coming into their league, we have a lot of people on this webinar that are running youth sports organizations. They might be an athletic director at a high school. So when we think about how can we best set expectations for parents or caregivers prior to the season to help set that tone? So what are some tactical things that you all have seen work? And Aaron, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, you're doing this at the college level, where, so I don't think it's necessarily that surprising. I'm sure there are things that are very similar at different stages where you need to set some expectations, but also maybe bring that down to a youth and high school level on what some of those, some of that advice might be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, and it goes for my college program too. I think at the start of our season, we get all the parents together along with our team and really have a great dialogue about what their role is, and defining that role and what it looks like. And so I think sometimes just kind of including them right away and listen, we know this is part of your experience too, and being able to have a dialogue around that, but then to reset them and talk about supporting their child and remembering that they're not out at training every day watching their child. So when we make tough decisions about playing time, we're going off training, and that's something, that they're not a part of. And that we hope they realize how great their child is just to be on our team, and that when they leave, what message are they getting from their parents after a loss, after a win, after a great game, after a game that maybe they didn't play as well as they wanted to. And so we definitely feel like defining that role and what it looks like is really, really important in person, and then as a follow-up with an email because sometimes, you get a message and then what do you walk away with? And so being able to re-emphasize that message on the front end, I think is really, really important in youth sports so that you kind of can at least start the season off on the right foot.
Yeah, I love that, both starting off on the right foot and then that follow-up communication. It has to be, it can't just be one message, but it has to be. And the fact that you talk about that, at the college level, it's happening. We're seeing a lot of trends. We work with the NWSL, but professional leagues are getting younger players in, and parents aren't necessarily used to, like their child might be 15 or 16 and they're like, oh, I'm the parent, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And it's like, no, they're playing professional soccer. So we've actually worked with a couple teams about trying to set some of those expectations as guidelines. But Steve, let's go to you on just sort of some of the things that organizational leaders can do to set some expectations.
Yeah, I think Aaron's spot on. I kind of think of it like this: is everyone feels like they need a role, and if you don't define it, they're going to fill it and how they're going to do it. So like you've got to like empower them, but also define that role of like what actually helps. Here are the constraints around it. I think the other thing that I like to do, especially at the youth level, is kind of have a conversation on what success means. Because I think often with parents, it's like you kind of default to, well, success means my kid wins or makes it to the next level or makes the team. And I think as coaches or, influencers on this, if at the beginning we can kind of like start to broaden that perspective on like, well, 15 years down the line, what do you want your kid to remember? That they won the trophy or the Little League championships, or they got this great experience and they developed the resit and grit and all of these things that are going to help them well beyond when sport leaves or when their time comes to end and participating. So really starting from the get-go of like, okay, how can we think of this more zoomed out than just through the narrow lens of like win or lose, zero sum.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. And I think it is you talked about this earlier, and as I mentioned, I've worked for PCA for a long time, but now being a sports parent myself, I can feel it. Kids are only 9 years old, but you start to get caught up in that, right? Of like, oh no, are they not, am I being a bad parent because they're not playing 6 sports, whatever it might be. So it's very easy to get caught up. So if we can, again, zoom out and give them that bigger picture, then I think that's going to help, because to your point, if you leave it, if you leave it open-ended, they're going to fill the void with something else. Alex, anything to add in regards to expectations at the start of a season?
I'll just add a couple things. First, kind of building on this concept of roles. I often think about helping parents align their goals with whatever the coach's goals are, right? So make sure parents understand what the coach is after and how they can contribute to actually be helpful in pursuit of whatever that goal is. I think a lot of the friction arises when parents want one thing and they often mean very well, right? And coaches have a different view or a different perspective on where this athlete is. And if you can get parents bought into the fact that they're a vehicle for delivering the coach's message, they should be reinforcing and empowering their athlete to be self-sufficient in the context of sport, depending on their age, that can be extremely useful. The only other thing I'd add, and this is true even at the highest level of sports, is that coaches are often reluctant to be honest. And I think clarity is kindness. And so to the degree that you can be very clear about what role any athlete is playing on your team, how to get better, how to change that role, where they can contribute, that is going to help parents cool off, manage the pressure, and be much more effective in the ways that they interact with you.
I want to build on that a little bit with this next question. There was a staff member at a local park and rec in Louisiana that asked, as a park, we love to have our parents engaged, right? And Alex, you talked about like, sometimes they're a little more engaged than you might like, or they're sometimes they can and they will be overwhelming in some way. So Alex, I'll come right back to you in regards to like, how can we strategically engage them, right? Like, how can we we talked about setting that expectation, but then they're like, hey, I'm showing up at every practice. Like, I'm here. I'm just going to stand on the sideline. Is there a way to actually turn that into a positive and actually engage them in a meaningful way?
I'd coach the parents too. Like, I wouldn't expect that they know what to do, right? So help them figure out how they can be most effective if they're going to be out here at practice, whether it's cheering their kid on or cheering every kid on, right? Or again, reinforcing the coach's message. Some simple tactics that get the parents aligned with the coaches, I think, can be super useful. I don't think it's helpful to try to keep parents away, especially in youth
Right.
sport. I think that just sends a message that it's us versus them. What I think we want to do is figure out, just like we would give the athletes on the team a clear role and a set of guidelines for how to engage in that role, we want to give parents the same level of clarity for this is what our boundaries are, right? This is how we operate when we come out of practice. This is what I expect of you. And here's how you can contribute best to the team that we're building. And if you do that well, you're just as much a part of the team as any of the athletes on the field. And ultimately, I think that makes for the best possible experience, is everyone feeling involved and included versus, we're trying to keep people in specific boxes or to the side and really make it be about the coach's show. And I don't think that's what anyone intends.
Yeah. Aaron, what about you? Obviously at the college level, you're probably not trying to do this, but at the, at youth and high school level, what successful things have you seen?
Well, I think, as Alex said, that inclusivity is key. And so maybe strategically, if they are wanting to be involved or they're showing up at every practice, you can find another role that they'd be really good at. It's where they can feel really included. So maybe it's they're in charge of social media posts or organizing a team dinner or
Yeah.
just some sort of piece that can add value to the group, but also take advantage of this energy that they might have about being a part of this team. And so I think you just add on another role, like, hey, it seems like
Yeah.
you're really, really interested in helping out. You know what we could really use your help with? It would be like, we'd love to or to organize a team bonding activity. And
Mhm.
so I think that can be a way that kind of takes them away from the competitive environment pieces that maybe you don't want their feedback on, but gives them a chance to be a part of everything.
Yeah, that's great. Steve, anything to add there?
Yeah, just echoing that. I think the key here, both from Alex and Aaron, is like you got to channel that energy. I remember
Yeah.
way back in the day when I first got my start, I started coaching high school cross country, and I look for the like most enthusiastic, over the top parent. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to give you some stuff to do. So I'd be like,
Yeah.
you're going to the first mile marker and I want
Right.
you to like record everyone's splits and then
Yes.
bring it back to me when you're done. And they'd feel like good because they contribute. And then I tell them, hey, this matters. Like this gives me information. Or, you take the person, you say, hey, I want you to organize some recovery snacks for after the race so our athletes can recover right away. And I think people, again, we're human beings. We just want to feel like we contribute. Sometimes that goes over the top. But if we can take that energy and channel it, that parent who now feels like they're doing something is going to be your biggest ally because they think, hey, I'm contributing to the team successfully.
Yeah. Steve, I love the point of you talked about like recording that first mile split. PCA, we talk a lot about with coaches, a tool that we use, positive charting, where you pick different skills that you want a child to work on, right? And then it's just like and it mostly is like effort based. So it's everybody can do something, but having a parent start to chart some of that. So after a practice or after a game, that you have all these things to be able to share in a positive way, and then it brings it. I think it also sets the tone on what's most important to you as a coach, and so it takes maybe their mindset off of the just scoring goals or the competitive nature, but it's like, oh, these are effort things. These are things that are actually helping my child get better, and we're going to focus on those effort-based things. So want to segue into probably one of the hottest topics when it comes to parents reaching out to coaches, and that's playing time. So Aaron, jumping in with you, how do you manage parents' expectations in reference to playing time?
Honest, direct communication right at
Yeah.
the onset. And I think Alex
Yeah.
touched on that a little bit earlier. I think as tough as it can sound, defining the roles, and I mean, even at the onset, when you formulate a team and you're talking about maybe a student athlete or an athlete taking a spot on a roster for that season, and really kind of having that dialogue with the parent. Hey, listen, this might be player 16 on the roster in terms of depth. And that means your playing time might not be where you want it to be, and making sure that they know what they're signing up for. So I think that's number one. And number two, being able to chart a path for someone that maybe isn't getting playing time about what it needs to look like to increase or change their role. And I think, can you have some really specific pieces of, maybe it's fitness, maybe it's your technical ability with the ball, maybe it's your, I'm trying to think of another sport. In running, maybe, I guess there's no playing time in running, right? But specifics where, hey, if you really show growth in these areas, then you'll put yourself in a position to increase your playing time. So I think all that communication is really, really important. And the parents probably need that communication as well when you're speaking about playing time, especially at the younger ages, because they don't always get the message from their child. And I think that can kind of alleviate potential issues at the onset.
Yeah, that's great. And Steve, I want to transition to you because Aaron brought that up, and I was a high school cross country runner myself, and recognizing that individual sports where it might be time based, or so there's not that much like, well, it's like, hey, like the proof is right there. These are the people that are actually going to be in the race or who's going to count. But when you think of an individual sport or a sport like running, how have you managed those types of things where it might not necessarily be playing time, but there is still things you need to deal with?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. You'd think it's black and white, who ran faster and who not. But sometimes parents can, make their own crazy argument. But what it does come down to is often like, who gets on the top team, who gets in the relay, who gets to go to the big meet or the secondary meet. And those kinds of things, again, Aaron nailed this, is like, you want to be just open and honest. And I'm always a big believer in explaining the decision. Like, this is why this was made, because of this X, Y, and Z reasons. And, here's what I see. And then on the second part, just like Aaron said, is I like to call it like, give them hope. Meaning I would often point to other athletes, often juniors or seniors, who had been in that spot before and say, hey, Susie, her freshman year, like, she didn't get much playing time either, but she worked on X, Y, and Z weakness to upper game, and now she's in the starting or in running. Like, now she's made the conference championship or the A relay team or whatever have you. And I think what that does is it gives them a little bit of hope, and they don't, sit on the sideline and think like, oh, I'm never getting out of this place. And then often like, something to do, meaning I need to improve A, B, and C. I need to run more hills or do more sprints or lift more weights or whatever the weakness is, to be able to like bridge that gap to hopefully get on that path to where I want to go. And that often, as a coach, also gives you lots of information, because you get to see like, hey, is this person going to be resilient and figure it out and put in the work and be intrinsically motivated? Or are they not? And that tells you something too.
Yeah, that's great. Alex, I mean, hopefully as coaches are having these types of conversations with players and parents, and they're setting those expectations, they're being direct, they've done all that. There are still plenty of parents that will struggle with like their child not getting more playing time, right? And so how can we help them or shift the conversation that, yeah, like the playing time isn't there, but there are still so many benefits of your child being on this team? So what type of advice would you have there?
I would just focus on the clarifying of the value of the role that the athlete does play. So when I was with the Raptors, we had a group of players, group 14 to 16, basically on our bench, that we called the bench mob. And the whole point of the bench mob was to like bring good energy. That was the whole thing that you did. And you might play 45 seconds a game, right? But for the rest of the game, the other 47 minutes and 15 seconds, like the only thing you need to do is lock in. And it made a huge difference. Like the players do feel that. The players that are on the floor experience that super positively. And so I think if you can connect a value to whatever role they play now to the overall performance of the team, that can be extremely helpful. Even helping them understand that like scout team reps do matter for getting people ready, and they matter for your athlete getting ready, I think can be a useful way to think about out how they can be a little bit more accepting of what the decision is. And then, like Aaron and Steve mentioned, I would try to give 1 to 3 concrete things that the athlete could work on to get better that would at least improve the odds of them playing. So you're sort of balancing the current value of what they're doing with the fact that it's possible that their role might change, that you can't guarantee that because everyone else is going to be working hard too. And there's a little bit of a balance to strike there.
Great.
Jason, I would
And
just,
yeah, go ahead, Aaron. Yeah, yeah.
I would just add too, what kind of experience is the child having within the team at training, and do they feel important? And have you done a good job as a coach of making them feel valued and important? So are they getting coached on those scout team reps? Are they feeling not like second fiddle when they're being coached, or that the coach is just paying attention to the starting players? Are they getting the same amount of touch points throughout a training session as other kids? And if you can do that really consistently as a coach, then that child is walking home from practice and talking to their parents and saying, I got better today. My coach told me this, I was working on this, they were watching me. And so I think those pieces can also help alleviate some of the parents thinking, oh, my child isn't important on this team.
Just to add that, because I think this is wonderful and such a great point, is kids just want to know you care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you care, they're gonna, to Aaron's point, tell their parents like, hey, coach watched me, like we're working on X, Y, and Z. And I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of, I'm going to pay attention to the stars or the starters and these people over here. Once they get in that spot, I'll pay attention. But I remember way back in grad school, I took a class taught by Charlie Casserly, who was the former general manager of the Washington Redskins and the Houston Texans. And he told me, he said, I figured it out when I had to realize that I had to make the bottom 20% of our team know they were valued, cared, and impacting things. And we're talking like NFL teams. So they're getting paid whatever, millions. And they still had to focus on, we've got to make sure these guys who are on the sideline, to Alex's point, they know that we care about them, that we're coaching them up, and that they matter. And I think that even matters more so if you look at youth or high school sport, where kids are lost and just trying to find a spot and find something like they feel like they belong and connected. So the more we can create that environment as coaches, as leaders, I think what that does is it takes some of, it's harder to do, but it takes some of the, parental complaining or what have you out of it when that kid is excited to show up, even if they're, barely made the team and sit on the bench.
Yeah. Safe, seen, heard, and valued are things that we talk about a lot at PCA and our coach workshops, of creating that sense of belonging. And Steve, you nailed it with like at anywhere, like where you're working, whatever it might be. And, Alex, you were talking about like defining that role. And when you think about how do you translate that to a life skill, right? All these kids are going to end up going, hopefully on, and they're going to have a job, and they're going to be, at different points in their career, they're going to have to play a specific role within an organization, right? So it's not as if they're not going to be able to use that skill again. They're not always going to be the star player. They're going to have to play a certain role. So it's a great place to learn that in their youth sports playing career. I want to stay on this, and just a reminder to folks, if you have a question, use the Q&A to drop it in the chat. But I want to stay on this playing time and sort of bring it down a level to how do we handle this at the recreation use setting. And there was a question about like, should it be equal playing time, 50% minimum? And, even at that rec level, some parents who may think their kids are like elite club players, and some coaches who only care about winning that AYSO soccer game on a Saturday versus like, what is that long-term development? And maybe just some advice on how leagues should not only define like playing time standards, but also how are they communicating that to their parents so that they know what they're signing up for and what their kids are actually going to be a part of. So Steve, maybe I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is tricky, but I think what it comes back to at the beginning is like having clarity on the purpose and defining what success means for that league, and that's going to be different than, some other super high club level might define it differently. But I think when you define clarity on what it means to succeed, what the point is, what we're after, what we're trying to develop in the people in this rec league, like your rules should reflect that purpose or that goal, which often means like we want to give people time to develop. We want to give opportunity to others. I'll leave Alex and Aaron for the specifics on this one, on what it might look like. But I think, you've got to instill that. And then I think this is also, people pay attention to what you do. So you can say all of that stuff,
Right.
but then if all of your coaches, like, play their star 8-year-old for 99% of the match, they're going to say, oh, these values, they're not real. So we're just going to go win. So we've got to make sure that we're instilling that and following through so that people see like, oh, everybody does get a chance to play. Everyone does get to participate.
Yeah. Aaron, what are your thoughts on that? I feel like being in the soccer world for as long as you have, soccer is often the first sport that kids will play, which also leads to, I think, parents being like, well, my child is the best 6-year-old, so we got to get going here, if they want to have a great career. So just advice for organizations, especially maybe like using soccer as an example of how to set that expectations, how to get everybody playing and making sure that they know what they're signing up for.
Yeah, I think even though you touched on that it might be a lower level or a rec level or AYSO, I don't think there is anything different about our responsibility as leaders to define what success is, as Steve said, and then to explain what that looks like and explain we're going to play everyone equal playing time and then actually follow through with that. So I actually would just echo what Steve just said about, okay, it's one thing to say something, and then what are your actions and what are the rest of the coaches in the organization doing, and do the parents see that, and then they can go back and say, oh yeah, this is how they said it was going to be. And I think the more you can reinforce that message through different touch points throughout the season, the better. Because again, we can't just say something once. I think the more consistent we can be about it, the more people will receive that message in a productive way.
Great. And just, talking about parents and their expectations and their goals for what their child are going to do in youth sports. We just dropped a resource in the chat here. We call it the 100-point exercise. And it's a great opportunity for parents to divide up 100 points or their priorities for what their goals are for their child when they're playing youth or high school sports. And then we challenge them to have their child fill it out too and see where is their alignment and where is there not. It's a great conversation starter to get on the same page, because there could be a parent that's gung-ho and saying like, we got to be practicing, 4 days a week. We're going to go to get a private, and I just want to play with my friends. I want to have fun. Maybe at some point that's where I'm going to be, but right now this is where I am. So it's a great way to open up that conversation. So I want to move on. Playing time, obviously a big topic, but also, Steve, you talked about this earlier in the open, just around the fact that parents can get crazy on the sidelines sometimes. Coaches can get crazy on the sidelines. It can be a intensive environment, unfortunately at all ages, right? This isn't just happening at the professional or high school level. It's happening at youth sports level. So what advice do you have for a parent that, is on the sidelines, and other parents that are on their team sideline that start yelling at kids, other team, other parents, the coach? Like, how do you, as a co-parent, as another parent on the team, what are some things that we can be talking to parents about how they can intervene in a good way?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one, and it occurs at every level. So what I would say is a couple things. First is understanding how your behavior on the sideline impacts your kids or the kids playing the sport. And here I like to talk about a little bit of research, which has done on both coaches and parents. And it basically shows, summing it up, if a parent or a coach is losing their mind on the sideline, the player, the kid, will feel and experience more anxiety. They'll feel that stress, right? Because like our emotions are contagious. And if someone is like communicating, our emotions also communicate. If someone you value and look up to and know and has authority is like sending a message of like craziness and stress, even if you try and ignore it, you're going to feel it too. So I try and communicate that because it's like, well, how do you want your well, first off, do you want your kid to be able to perform well? Everybody says, yeah, I'd love to. Well, do you think they're going to perform well if they have this extra stress, anxiety, fear, etc., like coming from the sideline onto them? No. I also like to use examples here. The late, great Kobe Bryant, he had this wonderful interview where he was talking about his experience as a parent on the sidelines. And he saw some other parent like you losing their minds, yelling, screaming, all that. And he goes up to him and he says, you just need to be quiet for a simple reason. Because those conversations that your son or daughter is having in their head, that's where they have to figure things out. That's where they have to navigate like that inner devil and, angel on their shoulder telling them to like give in to the anxiety or fatigue or keep pushing. It's to figure out how to deal with the stress and do the right thing in that moment. And if that voice is filled always by mom or dad screaming on the sideline, they're never going to figure it out. So I like to use a little bit of research, a little bit of, stories of examples of really good people to say, hey, like, what message or signal are we sending? And is that the signal that not only helps your kid perform well, but also like builds that inner motivation, resilience, those things that we really want to instill in our kids in sport.
That's great. Steve, you brought up just this idea of stress and anxiety that we're putting on kids. And Alex, I want to go to you on this question that just came in. On the mental side of things, are there any sports psychologist resource or recommendations you suggest, in particular with stress that's being placed on student athletes from their parents, and how we can support student athletes in those types of situations?
I think there's a lot of things that coaches can do actually kind of independently of resources, right? To help kids manage stress more effectively. So the first is you could set aside some of your practice time to do things like teach mindfulness, meditation, or breathing exercises. Most coaches fight me tooth and nail for that because practice time feels so sacred. But the reality is it might be the best 5 or 10 minutes you spend, especially if your athletes are a little bit more locked in and enjoying the practice experience more. And there's a great book out there called Sports Psychology for Coaches that has some really simple tools and techniques that you could deploy as a coach. You can go one level higher and look at apps, right? So things like Calm, Headspace. There's an app called Optimize Mind Performance that can help you learn some of these skills. And then you can take it one step further and actually work with a mental performance coach or a sports psychologist to help your athlete more effectively manage their stress in the situation. But I think the other thing you can do is talk to the parents about the experience they're creating for their kid. Like Steve mentioned, I mean, stress, a lot of the way we perceive stress is the way that it's framed to us. And so if parents create that stress or create additional pressure unnecessarily, especially for young kids who don't have the coping resources they need to be successful in those environments, it's going to become unnecessarily overwhelming. And the best intervention might actually be getting the parent to chill out a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. We want to, it's you said getting the parent to chill out a little bit, and I want to shift this a little bit to maybe having the coach chill out a little bit. We have a great question here, which I think many folks might have be in this position. As a parent that is all in with PCA, this is the question coming in, which we'd love to hear. How do you address a coach that doesn't necessarily follow the coaching beliefs or strategy of PCA? And so the fact that there are many coaches out there that might be doing more harm than good. So how do you as a parent be able to have that conversation both with your child and with possibly the coach or the league about, hey, they've been coaching this way for a long time, but kids aren't necessarily reacting the same, or kids, the way that we coach has evolved. So what should a parent do in that situation? And what advice would you have to parents that are trying to navigate that space? Aaron, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if there is a scenario where there is a coach that's being inappropriate in
Yep.
terms of verbally, in terms of their tone, in terms of the environment they've created for the kids at practice, I think it is our responsibility as parents to bring that to a higher up's attention. Because obviously we talk about anxiety with children. We talk about the stress of sport. We talk about them finding themselves and just trying to find a way to fit in, and sports are supposed to be fun. And yeah, they're hard and they teach resiliency and so many different life skills, but certainly we want our children to be in safe environments. And so I think if we're made aware of something like that as a parent, we need to absolutely have a conversation with a higher up. Because sometimes that conversation with a coach directly right away might not be received in a great way. And maybe the leader
Right.
can decide how to handle that without having any child or parent singled out. At least as an initial step of, you don't want a child to feel like the coach is now going to be mad because a parent said something. So I think letting a
Yeah.
higher up maybe address it, and then that higher up approaching the coach and saying, "Hey, I'm going to come watch your practice this afternoon. Does that
Yeah.
sound good?" And then being able to see for yourself some of the things that maybe are being done at a great level, and some of the things that maybe you can address with them and say, "Hey, I heard you say this to this child, and maybe there'd be another way to get your point across. Let's talk about what that looks like." So I think that can be maybe one strategy.
That's great. And Steve, I'm going to come to you in a second with some advice from you, but I also want to give a plug for the importance of you as a parent making hopefully the coach is doing it as well, but you as a parent making a positive first connection with a coach at the beginning of the season, even if there isn't a parent meeting or anything like that. Many times, especially at the youth sports level, these coaches are volunteering their times. They're, so making sure that you're introducing yourself, making some sort of connection so that first time that you're interacting with them isn't when there might be an issue. So Steve, any additional thoughts on how to navigate that situation?
Yeah, I think this one's a tricky one. And I think Aaron's right here is that what you don't want is, well, let me step back. Often if you're in one of those situations where the coach is, let's say, particularly demanding in the wrong way, if you go up to them as the parent or even as the kid, or especially as the kid, what happens is their ego gets in the way, they get defensiveness, and then they're going to take it out on your kid. And I think you have to, as a parent, you have to recognize, is this the type of person who's going to do that? And if so, you punt, you go to the higher up, you go that path. If you've established a relationship where it's like, hey, there might be some inroads here, then I think as a parent, you can try those inroads. And the best I've seen is to try and get them curious about better ways to do it. So you hand them, a book, maybe my book, I don't know.
Yeah.
You send them a video of Pete Carroll talking about, fun and enjoyment and his coaching style, or any number of viral things. And you say, hey, I saw this, this is cool. Send it their way. Then maybe that sparks a conversation. I think that's on the positive side. But I think as a parent, you have to identify, is that humanly possible? And often, sadly, it's not. But if it is, and you have that relationship, great. Try and find that path, expand it. If not, you got to punt, send it to the higher up, and hope that some change happens.
Great. Those are good examples there. Just a reminder, if you have a question, drop it in the Q&A. We're getting to them as they come in, so stay involved. We have about 15 more minutes left before we're going to have to wrap. But another question, which is another hot topic here, especially with parents on the sidelines, thoughts or strategies for addressing parents that are coaching from the sidelines. So what are some of those? And PCA has some great resources and a video about just how confusing that can be. But Alex, maybe starting with you in regards to, I think oftentimes, parents, as we know, they're passionate and they think they know best, and they might be yelling from the sideline on what and how many times where it's a ball gets to a certain part of the field and all you hear is shoot it, and then it's and the kids or even at the youngest age, right? They hear their name and they're like, what, who's calling my name? Right. So Alex is talking about what parents can be doing on the sidelines to not, interfere too much with the way the game's being played.
I think this comes back to some of what we've already discussed, which is helping parents have realistic expectations about the role that they play. And in fact, encouraging parents to model the behavior they'd want their athletes to demonstrate, or like model what it looks like to be a good participant in sport, right? So, this kind of interfering with the coach or coaching from the sideline, it's normal when you're passionate about something to give some feedback, right? But if they understand on the front end, this is not what we want you to do. This is the most helpful role that you can play. Here's the negative impact of this behavior on your child and their performance. Then I think parents are less inclined to engage in that kind of behavior, right? I think a lot of this comes from wanting to help and obviously loving and caring about their kid. It's not coming from some like malicious place where they're trying to undermine you as a coach most of the time. So, with that framework in mind, can you then help them understand how they can be the best contributor they can be? And again, coach the parents the same way you're coaching the kids. The more that you do that, I think the better the environment's going to be.
Great. Thank you for that. I want to move to a specific question here from an athletic director in Houston who's looking for advice on strategies to secure buy-in with parents who there may be a language barrier or it's tougher to connect with some of them, because of that. So I'm not sure if any of you have dealt with that. Obviously, PCA, we have a lot of different resources in different language, but it can be, challenging, especially so it could be whether you're, relaying things through the child to get back to the parent. But any thoughts on just navigating some of those things when trying to interact and engage the parents in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I've encountered that a bit in my coaching career early on, and I'd always look for an ally, meaning not just the kid who obviously speaks the same language or likely does, but I look for someone else on the team or maybe assistant, or when I was college, a grad assistant who I said, okay, like here's my avenue through communication, who knows me a little bit better than maybe this freshman kid or whatever have you, and like helps me with the communication on this stuff, whether that's even sending emails or even like communicating with parents, before a game or competition or even after, is I look for that ally. Because I know that, I'm not going to be able to build that bond or relationship as a coach if like they have no idea what I'm saying and I have no idea what they're saying. So it's got to come through secondary people. So I know it's going to come through their kid, but if I can also get that avenue through someone else helping me as well, then that helps a lot.
Yeah, finding those allies is so important, and it's a great way to engage parents on that as well. The question that just came in here is, and Steve, I feel I'm going to come right back to you on this because I think a lot of your posts on social media that have been making their way into my feed, and I just decided to follow you because it's easier to get it that way. But it's around like, how do you combat this arms race culture that is prevalent in youth sports today, and just trying to level set a bit with parents to try to, I think it's lowering the anxiety of the parents, right? Of they get caught up on it, and then that ends up going to the parents. So Steve, I'll start with you, but then Aaron, I want to shift to you to answer that, especially because you're dealing with that, players that are trying to compete at the college level and striving for scholarships. But Steve, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. As first, I think we all know the stats and we tell people the stats, but stats don't convince people, stories do. So where I always go to is like, the kind of, how do I tell a good story that gets this person to understand like A, the reality of it, and B, maybe the chances. And often what I do is again, enlist allies, but I'm lucky and fortunate to have a lot of friends who ran at the Olympics or professional, and often they're kind of the chillest on the sidelines of their youth sports. And I'll use that as an example or bring them in to talk because like they're chillest. Why? Because they know what it takes and they know how rare it is and how much luck you have to have in the circumstances. And they also know that like a parent doing all these things and going nuts on the arms race is probably just going to get in the way more than help whatsoever. So like we try to address things through like telling stories of like, I get it. The other part is I think you have to acknowledge the anxiety is real. Because if you sit there and say, oh, don't worry about that, that's not real, they're just going to look around and be like, well, every single friend in my neighborhood has 55 different, private coaches for their child to get them prepared. So if you deny reality, they're going to be like, I'm not going to listen to this person. But if you say, hey, I get it, that feeling is real, but do these things actually matter? And then the last thing I think is coming back to what we talked all the way at the beginning is, what do we actually want to get out of youth sports? What do we want to get out of sports as general? The reality is, even if you make it to the highest level, your career for most people is very short. Most people do not have long careers. They're going to have to do something else in their life. So like reframing it and like zooming out as best we can.
Yeah. Aaron, how do you balance those two things of obviously, a big part of playing college athletics and you being a coach at Minnesota is like you are trying to win games. You are trying to win the conference. You are trying to win NCAA. So it's balancing that with also they are students, they are getting a degree. But so how do you balance all those things, especially within the recruiting process when you're talking to the student athlete, you're talking to the parents? How does that all come together?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to try to have as honest conversation as early as possible in the recruiting process about what role you would see that student athlete having in your program. And I think the better evaluator we can be as coaches and then how well can we articulate to the family, the better off we are moving forward because yes, I coach at a high level and then we get the best of the best from all over. And so that the best of the best are used to playing every minute of every game. And then they get here and that might not be the role they have, especially freshman year. So how do they handle that? And what coping skills have they developed throughout their youth and from their families so that when they're in that scenario, they can not only handle it, but they can be really resilient about it and maybe even end up in a better spot because they just have toughed it out and they have listened and they have learned and then they're ready for their opportunity when it comes. And those are some of the most rewarding stories I have with athletes of maybe their freshman year they didn't play at all and then to see what they do throughout their whole career because they did develop coping mechanisms when things got hard to not just walk away, to embrace it and to use it as an opportunity to grow and get better. So I think those honest conversations in the recruiting process can really help with that piece so that parents aren't being unrealistic right away when someone enters into our program.
Yeah. One of my favorite videos that PCA has in our resource centers is a video with you, Aaron. So I'm going to come right back to you around when you are recruiting players and you're actually paying attention to their parents' behavior in the stands. So maybe just talk about that and how that comes into the recruiting process.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's their behavior in the stands, their behavior on a visit, if they take over a visit where I'm, meeting with a student athlete and her family and it's her official visit and their parents are the ones with all the questions and she's just kind of idly sitting by, even though it's going to be her experience at our university. So I think that piece of what do we model as parents and they're going to be a part of our culture no matter what. Our players are going to be at training and they're going to leave and their parents are going to call them because they talk a lot now way more than it used to be. And they're going to get a message from their parents about like, hey, how'd practice go today? Do you think you're going to start this week? And so what is that messaging? And so what vibe do we get when we're watching? Are they encouraging their children? Are they giving them a hug even though they lost? You can see the parents that don't do that, and I think sometimes those are the kids that haven't built up those coping mechanisms when it doesn't go well, which in sport and life are so important.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple minutes left and about 50 minutes in, and we got this question that I knew would come up because I think it's one of the, talked about another viral video that we have is talking about that, quote unquote car ride home after a game, or that, first touch between a parent and a child after the game. And, PCA, we often talk about like, don't talk about it, on the way home, right? Like that's not the time. They're not ready for it. But Alex, maybe what are some tactics or tools or advice of, the parent's been on the sideline watching the game. They're like ready to just be like, here's everything you need to know that you did wrong or right, right? Like I have all the answers, but how can we better control that as parents? And when is the right opportunity to engage as a parent with our child after a game?
It's tough because oftentimes the most impactful feedback is immediately after the behavior, right? So you've just watched the game and it's probably going to be most salient then. But a couple tactical things I'd suggest. First would be to start any conversation with, I'm proud of you for X behavior you did that you could control clearly. Like how hard you played, or the way you were a great teammate, or your communication with your coach. Something that affirms some good that they did. And then I would suggest that you aim for a ratio of 5-to-1 bits of positive feedback for every bit of criticism that you offer, which is incredibly hard for most people to do. But the data shows is what people need to actually internalize any sort of real degree of criticism, essentially. So if you're going to go have that conversation on the car ride, focus on what they've done well and coach them on essentially how they double down on those strengths. If you can avoid having the conversation on the car ride home, I think that's probably the best thing that you can do. Wait for them to come down a little bit, decompress, and then invite them into the conversation, right? Hey, would it be helpful for you if we talked about the game that you just played, and how would you like that to go? Or what would be the best way that we could have that conversation? I think is the most impactful way you can manage it.
Yeah, asking permission is so important. And Steve, I think you can chime in here on any thoughts you have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just echoing Alex. I think if we're honest here, whether it's parent or coach, that desire to jump in on the car ride home or right after the game is often anxiety driven. Meaning like we're feeling a lot of feelings and like we need to get that out. So like sometimes we just dump it on the kid. And I remember as a coach, like, seeing someone mess up, have a poor race, and the temptation always there is like, I'm going to give you 50 things we could have done better right here. But all that does is like dump a bunch of stress on the kid. Kid gets stressed. And we know this from the literature. They probably don't recover as well. They ruminate on it, and we're just disaster mode. So I think with parents, I often ask them like, hey, what's your kind of coping strategy right after a game? Right? How are you dealing with all the stress that you just watched your kid either win or lose? And you better have something too, just like the kids have to. And the other strategy I like to say is like, hey, if you can delay, as Alex said, like not have it, great. But if you can, especially with youth sports, if you can move it to what I'd call the second car ride home, which is often the first car ride is to like go get pizza or whatever with the team afterwards, like don't have it then. Let everyone decompress, let them eat something, you eat something, have a good time, and then open the door on that actual car ride home. That actually goes often a little bit better because we're out of that kind of like defensive stress mode, and that pizza and food and getting together and socializing kind of switched our stress mode a little bit, and we can have a more productive conversation. But even there, your just job is like open the door. If they want to get curious, if they want to follow through, great. If they don't want to talk about it, do something else.
Awesome.
And
Thank you
Jason,
for
I
that.
love
Yeah,
that.
go ahead.
I love that delay tactic, even for coaches.
Yeah.
And I know you have coaches and leaders on here,
Yeah.
but I think I learned as a young coach to not talk a ton to my team after a loss, because you're emotional and you maybe aren't actually evaluating how it went as a whole. You're just evaluating the result. And I think the longer you can wait and reflect and maybe watch film or maybe think about it in more detail and then give a message that's the right message, I think that will be received a lot better from all of the players that you're coaching. And so I love the delay tactic for parents and for coaches, and that's something I try to use so I don't make an error and say something I wish I could take back.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. We have about a minute and a half left here. So one quick hit question for each of you. If there was a magic wand that you could wave and change one thing about youth sports parents today, what would it be?
Have more fun.
Just,
Don't live vicariously through your children.
yeah, those are it. Just chill out.
Just chill out.
We just need to chill out on the sideline. Just chill.
Just chill. I love it. Thank you, Alex, Aaron, and Steve. This was such a great conversation. We could have probably went on for a couple more hours, but the resources that we've dropped in the chat, we'll send out this recording to everyone that registered, everyone that attended. So please forward it to other youth sports parents, other youth sports coaches in your community. If you have any questions about PCA, you can find us at positivecoach.org. Go and follow Alex, Aaron, and Steve on social. There's great information that they put out regularly. And just a final thank you to Alex, Aaron, and Steve for your insight and your wisdom and advice to hopefully make it a more positive youth sports experience for all our kids. So thank you very much.